The radio room on HMS Hermes, May 1982. An orderly enters carrying a signal, a single sheet of paper, decoded and formatted, time-stamped from MOD Whitehall. The duty officer takes it from the orderly's hand and reads it once. Then he reads it again. It is a stand-down order for a specific SAS patrol currently operating on West Falkland. The patrol is to cease its current operation immediately and return to the extraction point pending reassessment of the strategic situation. The duty officer sets the signal on the desk and looks at the map on the operations room wall. He finds the patrol's last known position marked in pencil at the edge of the western island. He checks the time and performs a calculation that takes approximately 15 seconds. The patrol's relay frequency in the West Falkland terrain requires a scheduled transmission window. Broken ground and the 60-mile distance from the carrier group combine to make reliable contact outside the window uncertain at best. The next scheduled window is 35 minutes away. The patrol's last known position puts them at or approaching the target they were tasked to observe and, if the opportunity was clear, to act against. The duty officer says nothing to anyone in the room. He picks up a stamp and presses it onto the signal. Received. He opens a file on his desk. He places the signal inside. He does not reach for the transmitter. He does not attempt a transmission. Outside the carrier group, somewhere in the dark and the cold of West Falkland, 4 SAS operators are moving through an Argentine garrison of 900 troops toward a communications relay station that, within the next 15 minutes, is going to fall silent for 48 hours. The duty officer closes the file. He writes one line in his log. He waits for the transmission window to open. By the time it does, the target is already gone. West Falkland in May 1982 was a different kind of battlefield from the one that dominated the news bulletins and the parliamentary statements and the coverage reaching Britain from the carrier group. The major actions, the landings at San Carlos Bay, the fighting at Goose Green, the night assaults on the approaches to Port Stanley, were fought on East Falkland, where the Argentine defensive positions covered the route to the capital, and both commands knew the war would be decided. West Falkland was geographically separate, operationally secondary, and, from the Argentine command's perspective, completely secure. The Western Islands garrison, approximately 900 troops, concentrated at Fox Bay and Port Howard, was isolated from the East Falkland battle. The British ground advance was not coming from the west. Argentine commanders on West Falkland were managing an occupation, not a battle, and they had assessed the island accordingly. That assessment was wrong in every way that mattered. SAS patrols had been operating throughout West Falkland from early May onward, moving through terrain that Argentine command believed was controlled and quiet. The patrols were small, 4 to 8 men, inserted by helicopter from the carrier group under cover of darkness, carrying loads heavy enough to sustain days of isolated operation, weapons, ammunition, rations, demolition charges, radio equipment, sleeping systems for the Falklands autumn cold. The carrier group was 60 miles offshore, which meant helicopter support was finite and weather-dependent. No patrol on West Falkland had a guaranteed extraction timeline. They were as genuinely isolated as it is possible to be on an island in a war zone, and every patrol commander understood that his decisions on the ground were his decisions alone, with no meaningful prospect of real-time guidance from the carrier. Captain John Hamilton coordinated the West Falkland operations, working with patrol commanders who ranged across the island, mapping Argentine positions, intercepting communications, and taking whatever direct action the opportunity permitted when the conditions were right. Major Cedric Delves coordinated from HMS Hermes, reading the patrol reports as they came in through the scheduled windows and building the intelligence picture of a garrison that thought it was alone on the western island and was not. Hamilton's brief to each patrol commander before insertion was direct and exact. "We are on our own out there. The carrier is an hour away on a good day. Make your decisions like it." That instruction was the operational expression of everything the SAS's decentralized command doctrine had developed over decades of working in environments where waiting for guidance was not an available option. It was also, in the context of what followed, the authorization that governed the 15 minutes that mattered most. The specific target that attracted the MOD's stand-down order was an Argentine communications relay station operating on West Falkland. The Argentine garrison's ability to function as a coordinated force across the western island depended on a relay network, a series of stations routing signals between the Fox Bay and Port Howard elements, and maintaining the communications chain to Argentine headquarters at Port Stanley. Without the relay functioning, the garrison's isolated units could not effectively coordinate with each other or with the Central Command, and their capacity to respond to British moves would be reduced to whatever each element could manage with local communications alone. The intelligence identifying the specific relay station came from SIGINT monitoring. Argentine signals traffic on West Falkland had distinctive patterns, and one station's traffic volume and routing function made it identifiable as a relay node rather than a local command post. The patrol tasked to observe the station had been inserted 2 days before the stand-down signal arrived on Hermes. Their tasking was standard for the West Falkland operations. Observation first, establish the guard pattern and the facility layout, assess the approach routes and withdrawal routes, and, if the opportunity is clear and the risk is manageable, conduct direct action to disable or destroy the facility. The phrase, "if the opportunity is clear," was the governing authorization for the patrol's decision-making. It placed the judgment about whether to act firmly with the patrol commander on the ground, acknowledging that a commander with eyes on the target possessed a quality of situational understanding that no one on HMS Hermes could replicate from 60 miles offshore. The patrol commander had been on his observation position for 6 hours when he finalized his assessment. He had confirmed the guard rotation timing to within 1 minute. He had confirmed the approach route and the withdrawal bearing. He had confirmed the gap in the coverage pattern that gave the demolitions pair their window. 400 meters from the facility, in the Falklands dark, he said one sentence: "The opportunity is clear. We go." The stand-down signal was being written at that moment in Whitehall. The patrol was already in motion. The stand-down order reached HMS Hermes through the proper routing chain. MOD Whitehall to Task Force HQ to the SAS command element. The signal was correctly formatted, correctly addressed, and unambiguous in its instruction. The SAS patrol operating in the West Falkland communications area was to stand down from its current tasking and return to the extraction point pending a strategic reassessment of West Falkland operations. The basis for the stand-down was new intelligence, Argentine signals traffic, suggesting a possible shift in the garrison's operational posture that the MOD assessed as requiring review before further direct action operations were sanctioned on the Western Island. The intelligence was real. The concern producing the order was genuine. The stand-down was not the product of bureaucratic caution operating without an operational basis. It was the product of an institution seeing something new in the intelligence picture and responding as it was supposed to respond, by pausing and reassessing before continuing. The problem was not the order itself. The problem was the physical reality the order had to navigate in order to reach the patrol. The patrol's relay frequency in the West Falkland terrain was degraded. Reliable communication outside the scheduled transmission windows was uncertain. The combination of broken moorland terrain, the 60-mile separation from the carrier group, and the radio equipment's characteristics in those atmospheric conditions created an environment where an unscheduled transmission might reach the patrol or might produce a partial signal or might not reach them at all, and the attempt itself created a detectable radio signature at a time and location that was potentially a security problem for the patrol on the ground. The next scheduled transmission window was 35 minutes from the moment the signal arrived on Hermes. The duty officer reviewed the patrol's last known position and the transmission window timing and said nothing. He stamped the signal received. He opened his log and wrote one line: time, signal reference, decision to hold pending the window. He placed his pen on the desk. The 35 minutes began to run. The patrol reached the Argentine communications relay facility in the early hours of a West Falkland morning after 3.5 hours of movement across open peat moorland from the laying-up position where they had spent the previous day concealed. The approach had confirmed every element of what the 6 hours of observation from 400 meters had established. The Argentine Guard rotation had a 12-minute gap in the coverage of the facility's eastern perimeter, consistent across every rotation the patrol had observed, the product of a guard schedule designed for a facility whose commanders believed the ground around them was secure. The outer pair took their covering positions on the two most likely Argentine response routes, providing the demolitions pair with a warning capability and a fire capability if the Argentine response was faster than the schedule predicted. The demolitions pair moved to the facility perimeter at the moment the rotation cleared. 11 minutes on the target, timed against the worst case of the guard rotation reasserting early. The antenna mast was cut at its base, mounting using a tool carried for the purpose. A clean severance of the structure, no explosive, no flash, controlled noise. The equipment inside the prefabricated building was disabled using small charges placed precisely at the power conditioning unit and the transmission equipment racks, selected to destroy the specific components that made the relay function without producing a demolition large enough to be visible from the Argentine garrison positions 2 kilometers away. The charges fired in their sequence. The report was sharp and brief and carried across the moorland. The patrol was moving before the sound resolved. Argentine garrison response reached the facility at 18 minutes. The patrol was 600 meters out on a bearing that took them directly away from the Argentine response vector. The outer pair rejoined the demolitions pair at the pre-planned rally point without incident, 4 men moving together toward the extraction point. On HMS Hermes, the duty officer had transmitted the stand-down order at the window opening 20 minutes earlier. The patrol had not responded. They were in their silent movement phase. The facility was dark and broken. The target was already gone. Before we dive in, drop a comment and let us know where you are watching from. If you haven't already, make sure you hit the subscribe button to not miss any story. And check out our Patreon in the description. We post full uncensored stories there. Every graphic detail, every brutal moment, nothing redacted. Stories YouTube won't allow. Now let's get into it. The extraction from West Falkland covered 8 miles of open peat moorland from the demolished relay station to the helicopter LZ, conducted in the growing daylight of a Falklands morning with an Argentine garrison that had confirmed damage to its communications facility and was actively searching for whoever was responsible. 3 Argentine search patrols were operating in the general area by 0900 hours. The SAS patrol moved in, maintained silence, each man at the interval that allowed the element to go to ground independently if contact became unavoidable without triggering a collision between patrol members. The ground selection was careful throughout, the natural drainage lines providing the best defilade from the elevated Argentine observation posts, the open ground crossings timed against the Argentine patrol movement cycles that the patrol had mapped during their pre-insertion intelligence work. Twice during the extraction, the patrol went completely static, while Argentine elements passed within hearing distance, close enough on the first occasion that individual voices were audible, and the patrol could track the Argentine element's direction by sound alone before beginning to move again. The discipline involved in remaining motionless on cold, wet peat while that is happening is not instinctive. It is trained to the point where it replaces instinct and then trained further until the replacement is reliable under conditions that test everything the training built. The extraction LZ was a flat area of moorland on the western edge of the operational area, chosen for the natural dead ground masking a helicopter approach from 3 directions. The patrol reached it at 13:30 hours. The Sea King was on the ground for under 4 minutes. Boarding, the patrol commander received the crewman's report that an Argentine observation post had detected the helicopter approach 40 minutes earlier. "How long has the LZ been compromised?" the patrol commander asked. 40 minutes ago, the crewman said. The patrol commander sat down in the cabin. "40 minutes," he said, to no one in particular. The helicopter was already lifting. The arithmetic the phrase was performing had nothing to do with the landing zone. The review of the duty officer's decision was conducted on HMS Hermes, within 24 hours of the patrol's return. The reviewing officer was the task force chief of staff. The duty officer was asked to account for every decision from the signal's arrival through the moment the target was confirmed taken and the stand-down was filed as no longer actionable. He did so without qualification and without apology. In the sequence, the events had occurred. The signal arrived at the recorded time. The patrol was assessed based on their last known position and movement rate as approaching or already at the target. The transmission window was 35 minutes away. A transmission outside the window in the West Falkland terrain at the patrol's current phase would have created a detectable radio signal at the highest exposure point of the patrol's approach and would have produced at most a partial reception that the patrol could not have safely acknowledged. He waited for the window. He transmitted at the window. The patrol did not respond because they were in silent movement away from a completed action. The stand-down was no longer actionable, and he filed it accordingly. The reviewing officer asked one direct question: "Did you consider transmitting immediately outside the window?" The duty officer answered yes. The reviewing officer asked, "And?" The duty officer described his full assessment of the likely effect of an immediate outside window transmission, the signal detectability in that terrain, the patrol's phase, the low probability of reception, and the lower probability of the patrol being able to comply even if they did receive it. He concluded with a single sentence: the target was already gone by then. The reviewing officer wrote that sentence verbatim in the review record, because it was the sentence that accurately described the operational reality the duty officer's judgment had produced, not as a justification, but as a fact. The finding was the duty officer acted within his operational discretion given the communications environment. At the boundary of that discretion, but within it, the formal command review of the stand-down incident examined 3 questions: whether the patrol had acted under valid authorization, whether the duty officer's decision to hold the signal was within his authority, and what the command implications were for future operations where a stand-down or modification order might arrive at an operationally difficult moment. On the first question, the answer was direct and required minimal deliberation. The patrol's tasking had included an explicit pre-authorization clause: direct action if the opportunity is clear and the risk is manageable. The patrol commander had assessed the opportunity as clear. He had confirmed the assessment against 6 hours of direct observation. He had executed accordingly. The stand-down order was issued after that authorization was given and was never received by the patrol before it acted. A command that is not received by the unit it addresses does not constitute an order that unit can be held to have disobeyed. The patrol acted on its last received authorization, which was valid and current. On the second question, the review required more careful language. The duty officer had the authority to manage transmission timing in a degraded communications environment. The scope of that authority had not been formally defined before the incident, which was itself one of the review's recommendations. Using the timing authority to hold a stand-down signal until the window, and thereby producing a situation in which the signal arrived after the action was complete, was either the correct exercise of legitimate operational judgment or a de facto neutralization of a command through the management of timing. The review's formulation, within discretion but at the boundary of that discretion, was the most precise language available for that genuine ambiguity. Woodward closed the review with a framing that settled the institutional question. The order was not received by the patrol. The target was taken. There were no casualties. The question of whether the signal should have reached the patrol earlier is a matter for the communications review, not the command review. The boundary of discretion remained in the record. The command review was closed. The MOD's review of the stand-down incident reached its conclusions independently and arrived at a different institutional emphasis from the task force command review. The MOD accepted the factual account that task force command had established. The patrol had acted under pre-authorization. The duty officer had made a timing judgment within his technical authority. The operation had succeeded without casualties. The MOD's concern was not with any of those individual facts. The MOD's concern was with the cumulative effect of individually defensible decisions producing an institutional outcome that a MOD directive had been issued specifically to prevent. The stand-down order had been issued for legitimate reasons based on real signals intelligence. It had been received by Task Force HQ. It had been stamped received, filed, and not transmitted. A sequence of decisions, each technically within the authority of the officer making it, had collectively produced a situation in which a MOD directive was effectively set aside, not through refusal or defiance, but through the management of timing in a way that made the directive irrelevant before it was transmitted. The MOD's operational director articulated the concern in a single sentence that became the most quoted element of the review record. The outcome was satisfactory. The process was not. These are not the same thing, and we should not allow the former to remedy the latter. That sentence was institutionally correct. Process exists to govern decisions before outcomes are known. If process is judged adequate because outcomes are good, process has been made contingent on results, which is the functional equivalent of having no consistent process. The task force's counterposition was equally principled. The process had produced a successful operation with no casualties and complete compliance with the pre-authorized tasking, which was the definition of a sound operational process. Both positions were internally consistent. Neither conceded to the other. The working group that followed was the mechanism for producing a protocol that incorporated both, imperfectly and necessarily. The revised transmission protocol produced by the Joint Working Group established a framework for duty officer judgment in degraded communications environments that addressed both the MOD's concern about stand-down orders being held and the operational reality that rigid immediate transmission requirements in hostile territory could create direct risks to patrol security. The protocol established 3 binding provisions. The first was a maximum hold time of 30 minutes from the opening of the next available transmission window for any signal classified urgent. The second was a mandatory log entry recording the hold decision, its operational rationale, and the calculated window opening time, to be filed for review within 24 hours. The third was an exception clause. A duty officer could extend the hold beyond 30 minutes without limit if he assessed and documented in real time that transmission would create an immediate and specific risk to the patrol's operational security at a critical phase of its movement, with the documentation subject to review within 48 hours. The exception clause was what the SAS had insisted on, and what the MOD had accepted on the condition that every use of it was logged with specific factors rather than general judgment language. The SAS representative on the working group reviewed the final exception clause language, immediate and specific risk, critical phase of movement, and assessed it as operationally accurate. He said, "The exception is the point. Everything else is procedure." He was describing the working group's product accurately. Every real scenario the group had constructed, every situation in which a duty officer would actually face a difficult hold decision rather than a routine timing call, was covered by the exception clause rather than the main protocol. The main protocol covered inconvenient timing. The exception covered dangerous timing. The West Falkland incident would have fallen under the exception. The duty officer would have logged his specific assessment, documented the patrol phase and the terrain factors, and waited for the window with a written record of exactly why. The outcome would have been identical. The process would have been fully documented from the first moment. Both sides considered the revision to be the correct institutional resolution. The file was marked closed. The exception clause entered service. Captain John Hamilton's operational contribution to the Falklands campaign was distributed across every phase of the West Falkland operation and documented in files that remained classified for 3 decades after the conflict. He coordinated the reconnaissance elements whose work confirmed the Argentine dispositions and aircraft locations before the Pebble Island raid. the night assault that destroyed 11 Argentine aircraft on the ground and eliminated a significant Argentine air threat at the most vulnerable period of the carrier group's exposure in the South Atlantic. He directed the advance patrols that confirmed the approach routes and the summit status before D Squadron moved to seize Mount Kent ahead of the main 3 Commando Brigade advance. He ran direct action and reconnaissance operations throughout the Western Island in May and June 1982, while public attention and operational priority were focused entirely on the developing conventional battle for East Falkland. Each of his patrol commanders received the same instruction before they went into the ground. Make your decisions like you are on your own, because you are. On June 10, 1982, 4 days before the Argentine surrender at Port Stanley ended the conflict, Hamilton was leading a reconnaissance patrol near Port Howard on West Falkland when they were compromised by an Argentine position. His signaler was exposed in open ground with no cover between him and the Argentine element that had detected the patrol. Hamilton moved in the opposite direction from his signaler and engaged the Argentine force alone, a sustained, deliberate contact designed to draw the Argentine response onto himself and give his signaler time and space to reach cover and withdraw. He was killed. His signaler escaped and extracted successfully. The Military Cross awarded posthumously described the June 10th action with the precision and the restraint that citations require. It covered one action because that was the action that could be described publicly. Delves wrote a private letter to Hamilton's family that described within the constraints of what he could commit to paper the full scope of what Hamilton had contributed from the first patrol insertion to the last. The letter carried more information than the citation. Hamilton's notebook, found with his effects at Port Howard, contained a single line written on June 9th. "Things are moving toward the end. We've done what needed doing." He was correct. The citation covered one day. The letter covered everything before it. The operational effect of the West Falkland Communications Facility action extended substantially beyond the 15 minutes the patrol spent on the target. British SIGINT monitoring of Argentine signals traffic on West Falkland registered the degradation in the Argentine relay network within hours of the action and tracked the gap continuously across the following 48 hours. Argentine communications between the Fox Bay and Port Howard elements, already limited by the terrain and the finite communications equipment available to the garrison, dropped to a fraction of their previous volume and reliability. Traffic that had previously routed through the relay station was either lost in transmission or rerouted through degraded alternatives with significantly increased delay, leaving Argentine unit commanders waiting for confirmations that did not arrive on the timelines the command system expected. Argentine garrison commanders on West Falkland, who received orders from Port Stanley during the 48-hour gap, confirmed receipt with delays that the Argentine command system logged as unusual and responded to status requests with further delays indicating that their own internal communications were functioning poorly. The operational consequence was a garrison that could not coordinate effectively during a period when the East Falkland battle was entering its final phase, and Argentine headquarters was attempting to direct its outlying elements. British assessments of the disruption were deliberately measured, contributed to, rather than caused, because the communications gap was one component of a pattern of Argentine coordination failures with multiple sources that could not be cleanly separated from each other in the analysis. The Argentine post-war review of the West Falkland garrison's inability to affect the East Falkland outcome cited command and communications difficulties among the primary factors. The review did not identify the specific source of those difficulties. It did not know about 4 men and 15 minutes on a West Falkland moorland in May. A British SIGINT analyst who logged the 48-hour gap wrote one line in the daily record. "They can't hear each other. They can't coordinate what they can't hear." The stand-down order was in a file on Hermes. The target had been gone for 48 hours before anyone stopped counting. The Falklands SAS operational record was classified under the 30-year rule and partially released to the National Archives in 2012. The released material included portions of Delves's operational diary from the campaign period, selected patrol debriefs from the West Falkland operations, and Hamilton's individual mission reports covering the period from first insertion to his death on June 10th. The standown signal from the communications facility operation was present in the released files, along with the duty officer's log entry recording the hold decision and the subsequent filing. Transmission held pending patrol window, target confirmed taken, signal no longer actionable. The release was partial. Redactions covered specific operational details, including patrol routes, target technical specifications, Argentine position data, and a number of entries in the patrol debriefs whose content remained classified. But the general outline of the West Falkland operations and the standdown incident were legible in what was available to researchers. Historians who accessed the files in 2012 noted two consistent observations across the released material. The first was the volume. The West Falkland operational record was substantially larger than any prior public account of the Falklands campaign had prepared them to expect. The major conventional battles had consumed the public narrative for 30 years. The files described a parallel campaign, small teams, isolated operations, timed logs, precise debriefs that had been running simultaneously and almost entirely without public visibility in the western island while the main event developed on the east. The second observation was the precision of the record itself, engagement logs maintained in active contact, movement records timed to specific intervals, position maps drawn to a standard that made the patrol debriefs independently verifiable against other intelligence sources. The archivist who processed the initial release described the volume in a comment that entered the research record. "There are more patrol reports in here than I expected. They were everywhere. The public account of the Falklands had been accurate about what it described. It had simply not described all of it. The files had always contained the rest." The standdown incident is taught at Hereford as a case study in pre-authorization, operational communications judgment, and the institutional tension between process and outcome. And it is introduced each time with the same clarification stated before the case material is distributed. This is not a story about the SAS ignoring an order. The patrol did not ignore the stand-down. The patrol never received the stand-down. The patrol acted on its last received authorization, which included an explicit pre-authorization for direct action in the specific circumstances the patrol commander had assessed and confirmed across 6 hours of direct observation. The duty officer did not ignore the stand-down. The duty officer made a transmission timing judgment within his operational authority, filed a full and accurate log of every decision, and transmitted at the first available window. That the timing judgment produced a situation in which the stand-down was no longer actionable when transmitted is a consequence of the judgment, not an expression of defiance. The directing staff addressed the misreading because some students arrive with it, and because the misreading is diagnostically useful. The student who hears the SAS did the right thing by holding the order has absorbed the outcome and worked backward to a conclusion about process, that the case study exists specifically to complicate. The MOD's concern about process was legitimate and institutionally necessary. A stand-down order that was neutralized through timing management, however impeccably documented and operationally justified that timing management was a stand-down order that did not achieve its institutional purpose. The task force's position was equally legitimate. The operation had succeeded. The patrol had returned safely. The pre-authorization had governed every decision throughout. Both positions are components of the lesson, and the lesson requires holding both simultaneously without resolving the tension prematurely in either direction. The DS ends the case study with a formulation that has remained consistent through every iteration. The target was already gone. That is not the lesson. The lesson is the authorization that put them on the target in the first place, and why clear pre-authorization language is the duty officer's best protection when the signal arrives at a moment when nothing can be done about it. The authorization put them there. The timing saved the patrol. The lesson is what came before the outcome.